Now, the French government is poised for a reshuffle. This after months of pressure on President Emmanuel Macron following strikes over the reform to the country's pension system and riots after 17-year-old Nahel was killed by a police officer. We can now bring in Andrew Smith, Director of Liberal Arts at Queen Mary University of London. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. It seems that French President Emmanuel Macron is sticking with his Prime Minister Élisabeth Borne. What does that tell you?
Well, I think the Elysee Palace has been very keen to present an image that this is not a major overhaul. It's not a reshuffle. They don't want to call it that. Rather, it's kind of tinkering around the edges. And I think what they want to show is continuity and stability in maintaining somebody like Elisabeth Borne. She's not a popular prime minister. Recent kind of polling shows that about 55% of people think it was wrong for the president to announce that he was maintaining Borne in place. But I think there's a sense that she has done her job. She's kind of delivered the pension bill, helped force that through Parliament to the guidance of the president. And of course, even where it has been through gritted teeth, she's eventually kind of jumped to the side of the presidential majority. I think that's an important thing for him to maintain, as well as sort of balancing that left and right coalition that sits at the heart of his majority, even if it tends largely to sit towards the centre right. So I think it's really a sign that he's trying to convey stability. This is, of course, the end of his 100 days of appeasement. And I think he certainly wants to show some kind of continuity with that, even if there has been a lot of upheaval, even during those 100 days.
But why does he want to project that sense of stability, given that he's had a very tough few months? We had weeks and weeks of protests over the country's over his reform to the country's pension system. Then, as you mentioned, that reform was pushed through Parliament without even a vote taking place. And recently, we had those riots after 17-year-old Nahel was shot and killed by a police officer. So clearly, there's a lot of pressure that is on the president. So why ignore that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the context in which this discussion happens. We look at the opposition, people like Mathilde Panot, of course, from France Insoumise, is saying that, look, nobody wants to board this sinking ship. That's the way that they're putting it, certainly. But I think if we look at who would want to board that sinking ship, who would want to become the Prime Minister, it might well be that man on screen right now, Gérald Darmanin, of course, who is really somebody that has been seen as a kind of rising star within the government's, within the cabinet. And that really would have been, I think, a very dangerous move, as you say, in the immediate aftermath of, the widespread social unrest following the police killing of that young man. And I think there is a real challenge there. And for Macron to maintain the possibility of pushing through some of these key priorities. Of course, we saw he had this big traditional garden party last night before summer recess, and it was followed by all the main papers, like a kind of piece of Kremlinology, seeing who sits where and what the power structures are and all the rest. And he spoke about his priorities there as well. They talked really about the idea of recapturing boldness, and in particular trying to address key things like ecological transition and the immigration bill. We know both of those things have been bounced in the wake of recent political unrest and recent social unrest in France. Of course, announcements around ecological planning were meant to be made on July 5th. We see discussion of immigration, and that can't be negotiated at the moment with the Republicans. So I think really this is a kind of holding in place. He wants to, as he said last night, reclaim boldness. But it doesn't look like that's really going to happen at this current moment. And this seemed very much to be a hold in place. We know there are big changes coming up in potential big changes. We've got the senatorial elections in September. We've got European elections next year. It may well be that this is the sort of, putting a pin in it, as it were, to try and show some stability, to kind of reclaim some action and force things through, but with an eye potentially on changing things in the months to come, potentially in the autumn. We may see a more
Andrew,
significant
very briefly, I just want to know what are some of the priority areas for the government over the next coming months?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think absolutely that ecological bill is going to be something that really needs to be addressed. We can see already with the heat wave sweeping Europe, the European Copernicus Institute said it's the hottest July since 1940 already, potentially. And this looks really like something that has to be addressed. It's something that needs to come out. We also know there needs to be a discussion of that immigration bill. Elisabeth Borne has not been able to kind of deliver the enhanced majority that would enable it to be safely passed. So those things are absolutely crucial. You mentioned as well the idea of the response to the riots. The government has really cleaved towards a kind of justice and order tack to that. It has not really addressed its underlying social problems, which create those issues around police violence. I think there remains a need to do that, even if there is not a government willingness to achieve that at this time. So big priorities, ecology and immigration.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today, Andrew Smith.